Mark, Wonder Woman 84 is upon us.
Right.
We watched it on Christmas. What'd you think?
Well, I've been waiting for this movie for a really long time. As you know, I'm a huge Wonder Woman fan. I really wanted to love this movie, but unfortunately, to me, it's not quite as good as the first movie. It's not a terrible movie. I still enjoyed it quite a bit, but I did find that the overall feel of the movie is a little bit different. It lacks a little bit of that energy and that originality that came with the first movie. But that said, I mean, I think some of the performances were fantastic. I think some of the action scenes were really good. It made for a good superhero movie in general. But what did you think about it?
You know what? The spectacle was great. But there's some about this movie that I just feel like I have a lot of nitpicks, but it didn't take away from me enjoying the movie. I still liked it very much so.
Yeah. Same for me. One of the things that I did have a problem with is the action scenes. While they were engaging, they seemed a little less realistic than they did in the first film. Like particularly angles, like when Wonder Woman would maybe like throw somebody or someone would fall, the angles in which they fell just seemed a little unnatural. And, just the speed of some of the action was a little bit strange, a little bit off, I thought.
Well, I really liked the contrast to this movie from the first one, where the first one had kind of like a darker color palette. This one had a bright, vibrant palette to it, a lot more colorful. And that's another thing too, is it felt like it took place in the 80s, which was great, but there wasn't enough 80s music. I wanted more 80s music in the movie. But it's like I said, that doesn't take away from, like I said, I still enjoyed it overall. And again, I have my nitpicks. And, at first, the critical reception was really, really good. And some people were arguing it was better than the second one. Unfortunately, I disagree with that statement.
Yeah, it's turned out to be a pretty divisive movie. It's getting a 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I know what you mean by those early reviews coming in and those all being sort of glowing reviews. Half the audience that saw it, that watched it yesterday, came away with that feeling that like, wow, they really stepped it up this time. This is like a really great film. The other half was sort of the opposite side of the spectrum, where they really thought that the plot device didn't work and that, some things were a little bit over the top. I kind of fall somewhere in the middle there. There were some parts in there that I really loved. And then there were other parts that I thought could have been a little bit better, so it's really, I'd say that it's similar to a lot of the other DCEU movies that we've seen that have sort of split audiences down the middle like that.
Absolutely. One thing I will say, though, what makes this movie better than the first one is the character arc of the villains. Both villains had an arc.
Right.
And you could kind of like sympathize with the both of them, and you felt for the both of them. Whereas in the first one, Ares just kind of appeared at the end, said what his motive was at the end, and then we had a kind of an anticlimactic battle at the end. Whereas this one, there was like a proper build-up and a proper arc for both characters, and I loved that about this movie more than the first one.
Yeah, and I can agree with that too. I think that Maxwell Lord, is a pretty compelling character both in the comics and this iteration of him. There's some speculation that some of the events in this film sort of trigger future events in the sort of modern day DCEU, and that those things will be explored in sort of the Flashpoint. There's nothing concrete that we can kind of look at for that, but that reading certain articles, that's sort of been the speculation. But I agree with you. I really enjoyed that. And one other thing that I thought was really interesting and cool was the sort of role reversal that happens between Diana and Steve, whereas like in the first Wonder Woman movie, she's sort of in awe of this new world.
Yeah, fish out of water.
She'd never seen before. And in this one, we have, Steve Trevor 65 years later, being fast forwarded into this world that where everything is completely different than what he knows. And Diana is the one that is like teaching him and showing him things. And I thought that was a really interesting thing that they switched those aspects of the character.
Yeah, it's like the same dynamic, but roles reversed.
Right.
And one thing I will say, what made the first one better, is this movie didn't have the same emotional weight that the first one gave me. Don't get me wrong, there are moments in this movie that give you the feels and, you know, kind of make you want to cry. But to me, I think the first one executed those emotions better.
Right. I feel like the first movie, almost the stakes were a little bit higher and a little bit closer to home, a little more realistic, you know, to where you actually felt the weight of the decisions that were made by those characters. Where as in this new iteration, the stakes it's not that they're lower, but they don't seem as real. They seem more fantastic. And so you're a little bit more disconnected from those things. And so you don't really get the gravity of what happens and everything in its aftermath. Yeah.
And to kind of wrap this up here too, the one main gripe I kind of had, which kind of made me let down after, now keep in mind, I'm still kind of processing this movie because I just watched it, you know, yesterday. But I feel like if you pluck this movie out of the DCEU, that it doesn't drive anything forward. There's nothing from this movie that I don't, in my mind, it's not going to carry forward with the overall DCEU. So I kind of do have a problem with it, because I was hoping it would be like other Easter eggs or other stuff that was going to be left out there that was going to affect Diana and maybe the rest of the DCEU characters moving forward. But that, without spoiling anything, that I feel like that didn't necessarily happen.
Right, I agree with that. And in addition, it didn't really fill in any gaps that, you know, any questions that you may have had about Diana, like, you know, well, where's she been all this time? Why has no one heard of her? And for all we have seen, people would have been talking about this Wonder Woman, this who has powers, like, but nobody does. And, you know, the next 30-35 years, no one ever mentions her. And so that kind of left me kind of wanting also.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as like rating this movie, I'm still processing. I would give it a solid 7.5 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I would say that I'm in the same range. Out of 10, I would give it about a 7.
Okay, cool. So also, we want to take this opportunity, if you're new to the channel, we are having a Wonder Woman 84 watch party on Thursday, January 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope you guys can be there with us so we can really, really get into it during the movie.